On October 16, 1972, Representative Hale Boggs, the House Majority Leader for the Democratic Party, and his fellow House member, Nick Begich of Alaska, climbed aboard a Cessna 310. They were bound for Begich's Alaskan home. The plan was for the two men to campaign for Begich in a very tight competition with his Republican challenger. The plane, however, disappeared shortly after entering into Alaskan airspace. It launched one of the largest search and rescue missions in the history of the United States up until that point. Begich, Boggs, and the pilot, Don Johns, were never found. Nor was any wreckage of their plane or any indication of where the men disappeared to. This began a long and mysterious journey for the American people into the Alaskan Triangle. This is Urban Legends Unmasked, and I'm your host, Chad Larriman. Well, there's the far more famous Bermuda Triangle. The Alaskan Triangle is very, very similar. There's a mysterious and incredibly large number of people who have disappeared into this region that stretches from, at the northernmost point, Barrow, Alaska, way near the Arctic Circle, all the way down to Anchorage and then over to Juneau. Massive, massive landmass over which many people have disappeared. Now, the difference between the Bermuda Triangle and the Alaskan Triangle is primarily that boats and ships and planes are what disappear in the Bermuda Triangle. Because this is over land, you also add in the sheer voluminous number of hikers and hunters and just general people who disappear in this region all over the ground. So there are estimates of anywhere from 16,000 to 20,000 people that have disappeared within the Alaskan Triangle just since 1988. So that gives you an idea that this is a large, large area. Now, there's a lot of theories as to why people are disappearing here, and I want to talk about several of those. I want to talk about three of those today in particular. One of them is I think the Bermuda Triangle effect. There's an argument that there might be some sort of vortex here, much like what is argued about the Bermuda Triangle, that there's something that just seems to mess with the compasses or guidance systems in airplanes that cause the planes to fly off, to disappear. I just finished reading a book by Stephen King, or at least the short story by Stephen King called The Langoliers, in which a plane flies through a rip in time and they disappear. They are moved back into a sort of time before, or the after time, I guess. I don't know. It really doesn't explain exactly what it is, but basically shifted into a time frame where history is consumed by these little balls of teeth and eyes. It's a wonderfully descriptive book. However, the argument is, and it's mentioned in there, is that perhaps we've slipped into this sort of Bermuda Triangle vortex and things have gone away. Well, that's really what some people think is going on here in the Alaskan Triangle, that people simply just disappear. They walk through rips in time or dimensional drifts, and I think that's a little bit sci-fi, obviously. I mean, I think there's something strange. I mean, we do have large numbers of people disappearing here. You have airplanes, you have hikers, you have, just normal people who went out for walks or for drives. There are a couple of cases where people, they're finding their left behind goods, like, purses or wallets or even their cars. And so they just vanish, they disappear. Much like you could see with this, I mean, there's obviously some problems, like with this particular theory, in the sense that, and a big hole, I think, and ironically I say big hole because you're really talking about a big hole in civilization here. This is a massive, massive area of land. We are talking about a significant portion of the largest geographic state of the United States. You're talking about a lot of space there. It'd be very easy to hide something or to disappear. So I'm not really quick to assume that we're dealing here with some sort of, rip in time Bermuda Triangle thing. The second theory which as a horror writer, I kind of lean more in towards appreciating this one, is that some sort of mythological creature is attacking, kidnapping, consuming people in this region. Now, right off the bat, I'm just going to say, unless this beast is able to jump a couple thousand feet into the air, I don't think that's what can explain aircraft disappearing. But there's a couple of them that I think are kind of fascinating. One of them is let's see, Tlingit, I hope I'm pronouncing that correct, myth of a figure known as Kushtaka. And essentially what Kushtaka is he's referred to as the Otter Man. He's sort of this Tlingit myth of the Bigfoot. It's their Yeti, it's their Bigfoot, and he's an otter man, and he's apparently volatile and might attack you if you infringe upon his sort of place of living. And so I find that one to be fun. That's an interesting idea, but again, it doesn't completely deal, I don't think anyway, with issues like planes disappearing. Obviously, I don't think the thing is like swatting them out of the air unless Kushtaka is like really, really tall or has some serious vertical. I really don't think that's the case. There are some other myths that are also involved, a little bit bigger. They kind of have their own Alaskan Loki, if you will. There's some references to trickster gods who live in this particular region. Trickster gods who perhaps get involved in maybe kind of bridging that gap between the monster of Kushtaka and the sort of temporal rift theory of the Bermuda Triangle variety. And so like these trickster gods would obviously make people disappear and have things go along. There's also some mention of mythological beings. By the way, that's Keelet, I believe. And then also a ghoulish kidnapper named Qualpalik, making people disappear. So, I think that in this particular region of the world, I mean, there's a lot of undiscovered things. I mean, you're talking about some dense forests, you're talking about mountain ranges, you're talking about places where people don't really hang out a lot, just, walk around. So theoretically, if you were going to hide some sort of mythological monster or creature, that would be the place to do it. Like, that would be where something we don't understand exists. But I also feel like, again, I think there's some issues with this particular theory. I mean, again, there would, in some cases, be signs of something. Theoretically, this creature would leave, especially if we're talking Kushtaka, would leave some sort of track or trail, similar to what we see with the whole Bigfoot myth. I struggle with that one. I do like more the idea that you've got some sort of like weird trickster demon who's making people disappear. They don't tend to leave tracks. So I don't think that that's completely a ridiculous idea. I believe in the supernatural. I believe that there are angelic and demonic entities. So I think that's a very real possibility that you've got things that disappear like that. But why? Why would the demonic entity populate itself in a very unpopulated region of the world? And maybe that's it. Maybe this particular entity wants to be left alone, and it's seeing these planes or these hikers or these hunters as sort of an incursion in its sanctity, its own independence and freedom. It's kind of how I feel when I'm sitting at home and I'm by myself and I want to be left alone and someone like shows up. Like, I don't make them disappear, but I can sort of identify with that irritation of like, I just want to be left alone sometimes. Maybe that's what's going on with these like demons in Alaska. The third and final theory is really not so much a theory as it is, I think, the real world view of what's going on. As I mentioned, we're talking about a region from Juneau to Anchorage, all the way up to Barrow. It's crossing into the part of the triangle that exists in the Yukon, and the rest of it's existing in this relatively unpopulated region of Alaska. And so what we've got here is, from sheer common sense, we've got a particular place that there's a lot of places to disappear. A Cessna 310 it's still a plane, it's big, but that's a lot of acreage. We're talking about trees and mountains, depending upon how fast or what happened, like when the plane hit, debris may have been scattered over miles and covered by thick, dense forest. So it's possible that Hale-Boggs and his friend were just like disappeared. Like that, they literally could have disappeared in a natural accident. Like the plane goes down, boom, gone. Spread out, gone. As far as people disappearing, that also makes sense. People get lost in far less remote places in the United States and disappear forever or for long periods of time. It takes a long time for us to find people who disappear in our national parks, which are very populated and very much observed and I guess you could say patrolled by a variety of officials, like both police officials and national parks officials, and still hard for people to get found sometimes. So I think that it's entirely plausible that what we have here is an undiscovered, untamed wilderness where it is very easy to get lost, to disappear. Now, some of the people that we've seen, a couple of stories that I happened to notice. There was a guy by the name of Thomas Anthony Newsy. He was a nurse and he traveled around. He didn't really have a residence. He lived in hotels while he performed his duties as a nurse, sort of a traveling nurse. He was also a well-known hiker. He was very good at taking care of himself, and yet he disappears. He was seen with a woman, and I'm going to come back to this in a second. He was seen with a woman as he was leaving a convenience store after purchasing cigarettes and snacks. A couple of other examples. You've got Frank Manano, who disappeared actually fairly recently, August 17th of 2020. Nanano lived in Fairbanks, and he was, in Nanana, near Fairbanks. He was believed to have gotten lost in the woods, but the problem was that he was actually an experienced hiker, traditional educator and mentor on culture, hunting, subsistence living, and respecting the land. So we're talking about a guy who understands how to live off the land and a survivalist. Like he would know what he's doing, yet he disappears, and still after over a year, no one knows where he's at. They can't find him. Another example was a woman by the name of Jael Tiara Hamblin, 20-year-old mother who went out to dinner with her roommate in October of 2014. They came home from dinner. Jael went back out, and she was gone. Like the next morning, her roommate finds her bed unmade and the car still in the driveway. Later, 5 months after she disappeared that October, they found her purse in the snow. Okay, so backing up a little bit. So we've obviously got, up to 20,000 people have disappeared in this region. So there's a lot of things going on here. I think it's possible that you have a lot of options. Sometimes people just get lost. Planes can crash in these areas and it becomes very difficult to locate them, especially if it's difficult for the wreckage to be seen from the sky, because people aren't just going in there and looking for things. But a lot of people go to Alaska to get away, to go off the grid. And it would stand to reason that sometimes people who do that do it for nefarious reasons. So it's entirely possible, and this is my own theory, is that at least some of these 20,000 people are probably victims of crimes. They are probably murdered in the woods. They are taken by people who either they stumble upon and don't want to be found, or people who are actively preying on people in this region. That they're actively looking for. It's I guess you would say easy pickings, which is dark and kind of dismissive, but that's really the way it is. I mean, it would be very easy for a mass murdering serial killer to live in these woods, take people, and make them disappear. Very, very plausible. So while I would say, if I'm ranking my theories as to what's really going on here, I would say that my least likely is time vortex. I'm just not that into time vortexes as a believability factor. I think slightly above that on the believability factor is that you maybe have some sort of Otterman Bigfoot hybrid. You've got maybe a supernatural entity that's making these things occur. I believe that slightly more. I don't believe that. I'm not really sure that supernatural entities are all that interested in being discovered, and they're leaving a lot of like, hey, what's this weirdness going on? And then finally, I think the one that's most plausible is that some sort of combination of people getting lost in the woods, accidents, and human killers that are doing these kind of things. So, aside from that, there is just the factor that Alaska exists for the purpose of killing things. It is one of the most inhospitable environments in the world for human beings to try to exist in. It's a difficult place to survive, even if there's not supernatural entities or vicious murderers lingering around in the woods. The moral of the story is visit Alaska, be careful, and unless you are like of the toughest stuff known to man, don't live there. Like, it's a tough place. I would love to visit Alaska for a short time. I do not think I want to live in a place that is that hostile to humanity. That being said, this was chapter 2 of our look at the creepiest urban legends in all 50 states. And I will also say, I don't really feel like that the Alaskan Triangle is so much an urban legend as it is more of the mythological type of legend. But being that Alaska is a notoriously not urban state, very, very rural state, it's kind of hard to get a lot of urban legends there. If there is a message to this, it's don't go into the Alaskan Triangle. Okay? Just don't. Stay away. Go away. Stay up. This has been Urban Legends Unmasked. I've been your host, Chad Lehrman, and as always, if you found these stories interesting, feel free to check out the stories that I have written myself on Amazon, the Sawyer Shepherd Chronicles Supernatural Thriller series, as well as Killtown. And here, probably within the next week or so, you'll be able to find Beneath These Brittle Bones, a new horror story about a body found in the woods by some kids that comes alive and basically starts trying to rebuild itself. I think it's going to be a fun supernatural horror. Please check it out. Got some Stranger Things vibes going on there, mixed a little bit with Goonies. Yeah, I like it. I think it'll be good. So anyway, check those things out, and hope to see you soon on the next episode of Urban Legends Unmasked.